What do avoidant partners find attractive, and how do they act when they're in love? Why is it that anxious and avoidant partners attract each other? Okay, so to answer this question, I want to briefly review the definition of avoidant attachment. We're going to take a look at some traits that they may find attractive. We're also going to talk about what are some challenges that they might face in a relationship with an anxious partner that in order to grow, and also how they might act when they're in love. There are also a few signs that are probably a little bit surprising that are indications that they have deep affection for you, but you might read them as the opposite of that. So I'd invite you to grab a pen and paper because you're going to want to stick with me until the end. And also make sure that you leave some comments and questions as I go through, just to let me know that you are connecting with this. So first, let's just do a brief synopsis. What is avoidant attachment style? So avoidant attachment is a behavioral style where individuals maintain a degree of, let's call it, emotional distance because they are hoping to preserve their independence. And so at its core, this pattern is a coping mechanism that's born out of a fundamental fear of being emotionally manipulated or depended upon. And there's a high value placed on things like self-reliance as a result. So psychologically speaking, people with avoidant attachment styles tend to equate emotional closeness and intimacy with a loss of personal autonomy. And so they wind up steering clear of situations that could stimulate these deeply ingrained fears of being smothered or controlled or subsumed. Okay. And that's usually because in their past, they experienced some degree of either for dismissive avoidance, it was modeled for them that emotions were either unacceptable or only certain emotions were acceptable. And so there wasn't a lot of modeling or education around how to connect to your feelings. And in fact, disconnecting from them was preferable. So that tends to be more of a dismissive avoidant story. We have the fearful avoidant story, and this is more where there's the manipulation of emotions, unpredictable, inconsistent, and unpredictable shows of affection, then being withdrawn due to conditions of worth, right? Conditions of love. So there were more mixed signals involved in the early childhood experience, and there may have also been some trauma connected to that. Now, some signs of avoidant attachment are things such as the emotional distance that I described. So they might be with you, but you might feel like they're not fully there. They may hesitate to commit to things like future plans, even if they seem to like to talk about it or fantasize about it. They may not actually take action towards that thing. They may tend to keep conversations at kind of a surface level. Now, it's not that they are fundamentally unemotional or uncaring. It's just that they're really careful about allowing people to get too close to their emotional core. So they may dodge things like conflict or minimize emotional conversations because sometimes those things disrupt a very carefully balanced sense of self. And this can be held together by rigid, but they're truly fragile boundaries, right? Because if you are worried about creating space, because unless your partner gives you space, you can't find your own emotional equilibrium, then you're not really emotionally free. And there's a fragility in that. So this is why there's that misconception that avoidant partners are uncaring. On the contrary, they're usually deeply sensitive individuals, which is why they are so reactive. Okay. And because they are sensitive to other people's energy, this is why they usually ask for space, or they shy away from things like emotional intensity. Okay. And oftentimes it's because they don't realize it's because they're very sensitive. So the other question, what are avoidant partners attracted to? I'm going to offer you 5 traits that avoidant partners find attractive. And I might argue, even secure and anxious partners would likely find these things attractive. So the first one is independence, right? And that's probably not a surprise. They tend to gravitate towards people who have their own lives, have their own passions, and seem to be seeking a partnership that is made of 2 wholes, 2 interdependent wholes, not 2 halves. Okay. So they might say something like, I love our time together, but I also want solo weekends so that I can recharge, right? Now, in an anxious avoidance situation, that idea that I need a solo weekend to recharge, it could trigger an anxious partner to say, why do you need to get away from me to recharge? Why isn't that spending time together supports you and recharges you? And that is because for the anxious partner, in contrast, their time with you, their time together is recharging for them. Okay, so it's important to understand there's a little bit of a nuanced difference there. At the same time, avoidant or anxious partners can appreciate the independent nature of the avoidant partner because it may be something that they admire because they feel like they lack that sense of independence within themselves. Okay, we're going to talk more about that in just a second. The second thing is confidence. Partners who carry themselves with assurance that they're not looking for someone or something else to complete them. Okay, I'm happy with who I am, and I don't need someone to validate my feelings or my needs. This is a level of confidence that sometimes our open hearts are seeking, right? That they're struggling with. Self-sufficiency. So someone who can manage their own affairs. For avoidant partners, they feel like it alleviates the pressure to have to be responsible for somebody else. And they may take pride in things like managing their own finances or managing their own schedules because they feel like it allows them to express their autonomy. Of course, the shadow aspect of this is they may not know how to invite their partners into a conversation about something that actually affects both of them, especially because if one person's making independent decisions that affect the relationship, then it's not just affecting them, it's also affecting their partner. So learning how to open up and invite co-creative solutions, invite a dialogue around what's going to be useful for each one individually and the relationship together is really important. And that's a growth challenge. And this might be surprising, but they also appreciate direct communication, someone who expresses what they need and want plainly and avoids that dance of ambiguity or unspoken expectations. Even though sometimes avoidant partners themselves shy away from being direct because they have a fear of confrontation, but they tend to admire it in others. And so there can be a paradoxical presentation here in their attraction, right? They like someone who's direct and upfront and plain and transparent, but then at the same time, they themselves are not always so plain and transparent. That's one of the paradoxical aspects of attraction. And again, we're going to talk about this in just more deeply in just a sec. The last thing is emotional strength. What do I mean by emotional strength? This is someone who has the capacity to navigate, let's say, the roller coasters of life with composure. They are able to process their own emotions independently enough so that the relationship doesn't suffer a lot of turbulence. Okay. Avoidant partners tend to avoid conflict. They don't usually like a lot of emotional turbulence in a relationship. And so they may be drawn to someone who can be somewhat self-contained in terms of how they're processing their emotions, which isn't right or wrong. It's just one way of moving through the world. Whereas sometimes our open hearts and even to some degree our fearful avoidant evasive lifers, they tend to need and want a partner to assist in the emotional processing, or at least to be a participant in the emotional processing. And so if an avoidant partner is paired with an anxious one, they will have to learn to some degree to participate in that activity, because this is one of the gifts that the anxious partner has to give them, right? Learning about how we can contribute to each other's emotional experiences. Doesn't have to be this parallel play all the time. Now, in speaking about the paradoxes around what attracts them, I do want to talk a little bit about the shadow aspect of avoidant attraction. Okay. And this speaks to what I have referred to as the anxious avoidant trap, that situation where we tend to find avoidant partners paired with an anxious partner, or it could be a fearful avoidant partner paired with an anxious or avoidant partner, because the spice of life or the fearful avoidant embodies both avoidant and anxious tendencies. So for example, if we have a fearful avoidant paired with an anxious partner, the anxious partner is usually going to polarize the fearful avoidant to become more avoidant. If the fearful avoidant is paired with an avoidant partner, then the avoidant partner is going to polarize the fearful avoidant or the disorganized partner to become increasingly anxious. Okay, so when I say the anxious avoidant trap, I'm talking about a situation where in the relationship, either there's someone who is always chasing the other and the other is always running away, or there's a circumstance where one chases the other until this person finally turns around and starts to reciprocate. And all of a sudden, the chaser becomes the runner. And it's this sort of back and forth that starts to occur. Okay. When that happens, usually one or both of them actually has disorganized attachment or fearful avoidance going on. I want to talk about this in terms of what I'm going to refer to as the shadow aspect of attraction, meaning why these relationships can be so catalytic, because they are demonstrating to us an aspect of ourselves that we have repressed or buried or denied for some reason. And we are intensely drawn to this person because they serve as some kind of focal point, conduit, or container for us to realize those suppressed parts and access them for ourselves. And so we feel tremendously enlivened in their presence, because in being in their presence, they call up feelings, parts of ourselves that we hadn't allowed ourselves to experience or express before. So I want to talk about this in the context of our questions. Why is it that an avoidant partner, for all these other traits that we mentioned and some of the paradoxical presentations of those attractive traits, why is it that emotional intensity may scare them off, but also be the thing that attracts them? Well, because it is the polarity, that emotional intensity represents the polarity that they have often suppressed within themselves or cut themselves off from internally. So this is why a lot of avoidant partners may not consciously say that they want an emotionally intense partner, but then they usually wind up attracting them and then experiencing significant chemistry with them. So I would argue this is their spiritual assignment for growth, right? And if you are the anxious partner or the more anxious partner, then your emotional intensity is really the greatest gift that you can afford this partner. So do not hide it. Do not walk on eggshells. Do not try to suppress that. Okay. Now you might say, well, I thought I was supposed to give them space. So stick with me for a second, because I want to offer you 3 reasons why this emotional intensity is a gift to your partner. So the first thing, avoidant partners close up because that was the safest way to find relief from fear and anxiety in their experience, to the threat to their attachment relationships. And they were right. They've developed this coping mechanism because it was the most functional way to survive in the environments in which they grew up, or in the social structures in which they grew up. But in doing so, they also learned to shut out all the good feelings. Shut out all the bad feelings, but also shut out all the good feelings. And so they haven't seen or experienced enough proof in their life that the pain, if they were to allow in the pain, is worth the pleasure that might come with it. And so your emotions can be the evidence that they need to see the value in opening up, right? Secondly, if you are the partner that is walking on eggshells, when you do this, you accommodate and perpetuate those coping mechanisms. You allow that partner to hide from you. And then you wind up hiding from them, right? Because when you allow them to hide from you, you clam up, you walk on eggshells, you don't want to push too hard because you don't want to seem like a burden. All of a sudden you're doing the same thing, aren't you? You are hiding from them. And so now it's a cycle where both partners are losing out on the depth of connection and understanding that could be exchanged in this relationship. So your emotions, if you are the anxious partner or the more anxious partner, is really a potent energy that can catalyze both of you out of hiding, right? And sometimes the relationships become so tumultuous because it does. You both feel really exposed, and now all your defense mechanisms are in an uproar because you don't know what to do with that exposure. Now, number 3, your pain, if you are experiencing pain in this kind of tumultuous situation, the pain is a consequence of avoiding pain. Let's call that a behavior that was functional and now is dysfunctional because they're in a new situation where love is trying to come in and they're not allowing it in. And so unless we express how we feel, then we are withholding the consequence of that dysfunctional behavior. We're not giving our partners any reason to change. Oh, you want to curl up like a little crab and pull in, and you want to tighten up and you want to just wait for the storm to pass? Okay, I'll just let you do that. There's no impetus to change, right? Because they haven't seen the proof of changing as yet, and you're just letting that happen. So there's no reason for them to change. Simultaneously, if you do that, now you're keeping yourself stagnant, not truly knowing if the two of you are compatible. It's really just defensive communication now, and defensive patterning and coping mechanisms that are going on between you. It's all this goop layered on top of what is the real connection here. Okay. So unless you're willing to work through communication, which is why I believe communication is the rule out factor to find out if you really are compatible, unless you're willing to work through that communication, you're never going to know if you really are compatible, because maybe beneath all of that triggering goop, you really do have the same values, priorities, and vision for the future. Right. But if you're too worried about coming from a place of fear and self-protection, then you're never going to find out if it's possible to explore those things together, right? And that's why our emotions are a catalyzing gift for change in an avoidant partner, is if they're ready to receive it, right? Now, they have to be ready to receive it. They need to be willing to step up to the plate. So you can do your due diligence, meaning, learning how to express your feelings to a partner can be somewhat of a fine art, because it is important what you say and how you say it, especially to an avoidant partner. I would argue that many of us in Western culture, at least, have been taught terrible communication skills. And oftentimes I'll encounter clients who say, well, I am being honest about how I feel, but they're not. They're using language that they were taught to, this is how you express how you feel. but it's actually defensive language that puts people on the defense. So for example, well, I told them how I felt. I told them I felt abandoned. Abandoned is not a feeling word. Abandoned is an evaluation of what they are doing. It's still decentering you. Okay. Because there's an invisible by you at the end of that sentence. I feel abandoned by you. And so you're still criticizing, evaluating what the other person is or is not doing. You're still assessing what is my proximity to them in this relationship and so on. So how do we shift that language? Well, we center it back inside the body and we notice that feelings are energy moving through your body. So when you feel abandoned, what is that energy moving through your body? How does that feel? Hollow, heavy, lonely, detached, and so on. Maybe angry, frustrated, helpless, right? So these are words that are closer to the energetic emotional experience that you're having. And the closer we can express ourselves in approximation to the truth of what we're experiencing, the less time you spend trying to fill up the space between you and someone else out of fear. And the more time you spend sucking that right back into your own centered, grounded energy, holding that center line and saying, this is what I'm feeling, what's going on inside of me. And I'm going to extend the invitation because I want to connect with you. I want to invite you into being a contributor to my emotional experience. And if you decline to participate in that experience, then that's really good information for me. That lets me know our degree of compatibility. Okay. So if you want to learn more about how to avoid walking on eggshells and trying to, let's say, step out of your center through things like that, I encourage you, I'm going to leave a link in the caption of this video or in the replay that will give you a link to my course, The Courageous Communicator, which is available now. And it's going to walk you through my 3-step HIP communication formula and how to do this, particularly in insecure relationships. Okay. So just an aside about that. Also, remember to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. I put out videos once a week and I wouldn't want you to miss out.